Alone I sat when the Old One sought me, the terror of gods, and gazed in mine eyes. What hast thou to ask? Why comest thou hither? Odin, I know where thine eye is hidden. Among all the gods of European mythology, Odin is one of the most recognizable, yet at the same time the most enigmatic. His fundamental nature has been examined by many different scholars with varying conclusions. In the Roman period, he was associated with Mercury, and according to Tacitus, he was worshipped more than any other. Yet this is almost exactly what Julius Caesar said of Mercury among the Celts of Gaul. Some have even speculated that Tacitus was just repeating Caesar's words without any real understanding. Is there really a connection between the Mercury of the Celts and the Germans? I will strive to answer this question through an examination of archaeology, ancient Roman sources, and Germanic and Celtic mythology. The oldest likely references to Odin do not come from manuscripts of the Norse, but from the Roman writer Tacitus. Though he does not use the native name for the god, his comments can be understood to refer to him. He says, "Of all the gods, Mercury is he whom they worship most. To him on certain stated days it is lawful to offer even human victims." That he is a god of the heavens is expressed in Tacitus's description of the casting of lots, where he says, "After he had solemnly invoked the gods, with eyes lifted up to heaven." Yet perhaps even in Tacitus, Odin or Woden is not always interpreted as Mercury. In a quotation from the Tencteri, the writer reports the following statement from their ambassadors who came before the Roman Senate. "For your return into the unity of the German nation and name, we give thanks to the gods whom we worship in common, and to Mars, the chief of our divinities. And we congratulate you that at length you will live as free men among the free." Some would of course use this to fuel the idea that Tyr or Tiwas was the original chief of the Germanic gods, something unsupported by sources and based entirely on etymology, which connects his name to that of Zeus and the Proto-Indo-European name for the god of the bright sky, or possibly God in general. However, it's more likely that the Tencteri are simply interpreting Odin as Mars, and there are plenty of reasons to do so. He wields a spear, he imparts strength to warriors, he leads war bands, he decides victory in battle, and like Mars, he is considered the father of those who founded various tribes. In another account by Tacitus, the following is stated when discussing tribal customs among the Germans. "But to none else but the priests is it allowed to exercise correction, or to inflict bonds or stripes. Nor when the priests do this is the same considered as a punishment, or arising from the orders of the general, but from the immediate command of the deity, him whom they believe to accompany them in war." A slightly later account by Jordanes in the Getica adds further support to the notion that Odin was variously interpreted as either Mars or Mercury. "Now Mars has always been worshipped by the Goths with cruel rites, and captives were slain as his victims. They thought that he who is Lord of War ought to be appeased by the shedding of human blood. To him they devoted the first share of the spoil, and in his honor arms stripped from the foes were suspended from trees. And they had more than all other races a deep spirit of religion, since the worship of this god seemed to be really bestowed upon their ancestors." Now, the act of suspending sacrifices from trees is connected to Odin. Adam of Bremen, writing in the 11th century, said the following concerning the nature of the god. "The other, Wotan, that is, fury, carries on war and imparts to man strength against his enemies. But Wotan they chiseled armed, as our people are wont to represent Mars, for all their gods are appointed priests to offer sacrifices for the people. If plague and famine threaten, a libation is poured to the idol of Thor. If war, to Wotan. It is beyond doubt that Odin was just as likely, or even more likely, to be interpreted as Mars during the Roman period. Yet we know, based on the parceling out of the days of the week, that Odin was equated with Mercury in some cases, hence Wednesday being derived from a form of his name. This is likely to be because of special differences between Tu and Woden, as Woden was connected to travel, trade, and wealth as well as war. The same can be said of his Celtic counterpart, namely Lugus. In Gaelic myth, Lugh also holds the power to decide victory in battle. His magical spear, one of the 4 sacred treasures, never misses its mark and grants victory to the side who holds it. The theme of the Spear of Heaven is an ancient one in the Celtic world, which can be found in Roman commentaries on the Iberian Celts. Florus, in the Epitome, said, "There would have been trouble also with all the Celt-Iberians had not the leader of their rising, Olendicus, a man of great craft and daring, if only fortune had favored him, been put out of the way early in the war. This man, brandishing a silver spear which he claimed had been sent from heaven, and behaving like a prophet, had attracted general attention." In myth, Lugh's aid and leadership is required in order to defeat the Fomorians, the Gaelic giants, and he is accounted the strongest warrior to have ever lived in Euhemerized accounts. In the poem The Bird of Achille, he is described as following by the ancient bird. "From Mag Ketna between 2 woods, to fertile branching Kesh Coran, many were the screams of peril from the weapons of the many-skilled one. After the time of the armed son of Ethna, were many ravens and hooded crows. It was a portent of the chewing of bone, beside heroic-handed Lugh. I myself never saw, in the east nor the north, nor the south nor the west, nor did I hear of a warrior like Lugh, from the day that Adam was born." Despite being a master of all skills, aligning with the comments made by Julius Caesar about the worship of Mercury in Gaul, Lugh is primarily associated with war and prowess in battle, and is thus similar to Odin in this respect. His aspect of war may have been more dominant in some places than others, and likely evolved over time. In a Gaulish Iron Age sanctuary around Nimes, the god of the sanctuary was depicted as a warrior in a seated position wearing armor. In the Roman period, the same sanctuary began to show up with icons depicting Mercury, showing a gradual merger of the Roman and Celtic concepts of the god. Within the writings of Tacitus, there may yet be one final, far more mysterious reference to Odin. "At a stated time of the year, all the several peoples descended from the same stock assembled by their deputies in a wood, consecrated by the idolatries of their forefathers, and by superstitious awe in times of old. There, by publicly sacrificing a man, they begin the horrible solemnity of their barbarous worship. To this grove another sort of reverence is also paid. No one enters it otherwise than bound in ligatures, thence professing his subordination and meanness and power of the deity there. If he falls, he is not permitted to rise or be raised, but grovels along the ground. And of all their superstitions, this is the drift and tendency, that from this place the nation drew its origin, that here God, the supreme governor of the world, resides, and that all things else whatsoever are subject to him and bound to obey him." This grove is almost certainly the same as mentioned in the later Norse tale called Filtharlundr, Grove of Fetters. In the Eddic poem The Second Lay of Helgi Hundingsbane, we are told, Dag, the son of Hogni, sacrificed to Odin for vengeance for his father. Odin lent Dag his spear. Dag met with his relation Helgi in a place called Fjotarlandr and pierced him through with his spear. Helgi fell there, but Dag rode to the mountains and told Sigrun what had taken place. The spear of Odin is frequently connected with vengeance, and the theme is shared with Gaelic Lugh, revealing the underlying relationship to the enforcement of cosmic order and justice which the god oversees. However, equally interesting is the association with fetters. In Havamal, Odin boasts about his power to escape from bonds, yet the fetter loosener is also the fetterer, the god of the hanged, god of prisoners. In the Gesta Danorum, Saxo Grammaticus describes an interesting incident. The kings of the north, desiring more zealously to worship his deity, embounded his likeness in a golden image, and this statue, which betokened their homage, they transmitted with much show of worship to Byzantium, fettering even the effigied arms within a serrated mass of bracelets. Odin was overjoyed at such notoriety, and greeted warmly the devotion of the senders. But his queen, Frigga, desired to go forth more beautified, called smiths and had the gold stripped from the statue. Odin hanged them and mounted the statue upon a pedestal, which by the marvelous skill of his art he made to speak when a mortal touched it. The statue of Odin is described as being fettered, and in punishment for its defilement he hangs the guilty, the ultimate morbid fettering. The connection with such binding is likewise found in later Germanic folklore. A story recorded by the Grimm brothers recalls that Wold would ride at night and do mischief. Suddenly, out of the clouds there plunged down right before him a tall man on a white horse. "Are you strong?" says he. "Here, catch hold of this chain. We'll see which can pull the hardest." The peasant courageously grasped the heavy chain, and up flew the wild hunter into the air. The man twisted the end round an oak that was near, and the hunter tugged in vain. "Haven't you tied your end to the oak?" asked Woad, coming down. "No," replied the peasant. "Mook, I am holding it in my hand." "Then you'll be mine up in the clouds," cried the hunter as he swung himself aloft. In Celtic myth, Lugh is likewise associated with fettering. One of his remarkable artifacts was the Chain of Lugh, which bound the prisoners of the Tuatha De Danann and the sons of Míl, which is to say, gods and men. Thus, Lugh is, like Odin, the god of prisoners. He is sometimes called Lugh Liamna, Lugh of the accusations, related to his enforcement of the law. The tale of the sons of Turin demonstrates that his enforcement was strict and typically lethal. A special rope used to hurl javelins is also sometimes called the cord of Lugh, and in a Fenian poem, hung victims of the war ban were said to be dedicated to him. Saint Muglasius, one of whose archaic feast days was on Lunasa, caused all the locks and doors in Rome to fly open, took away the ability of speech and movement, caused a tree to move and grab hold of a horse, seizing it by the leg, and magically created fine leather shoes and gloves for workers. British Saint Samson, who likewise has a feast day around the time of Lunasa, fought dragons through the power of binding. In Welsh myth, Lle is noted for his deft ability in sewing shoe leather, which Gwydion has produced magically, and one likely depiction of him from posthumous era Gaul shows a figure wearing armor and boots, with a corvid on his hand and shoulder and holding a trident. The coin calls him Sutor Augustus, the Divine Shoemaker. A dedication in Spain is also made to Lugus by the Guild of Shoemakers. This is likely not only because the god is associated with travel, but with the process of binding and cord with which the shoemaker was closely connected. He may also have been connected to tannin found in oak bark, acorns, and peat bogs, which are used to create leather. Odin's son Vithar is likewise connected to shoes. Worn-out shoes were dedicated to him so that they might strengthen his own shoe when he uses it to hold open the mouth of Fenrir during Ragnarok. Odin is notoriously known by many names, all of which convey different aspects of his divinity. However, he was most frequently and most widely known as Odin or Wodan, coming from the Proto-Germanic Wodanas. The name is related to Wodas, meaning rage or mania, the origin of Old Norse Other, likely a double of Odin. This is the same origin as Gaelic Fa, meaning prophet or seer, and Latin vates, of the same meaning. The name Odin, at one time, likely referred to him as being the seer. In later myths, the loss of his eye, his possession of the head of Mimir, his connection with ravens, and his theft of the mead of poetry all relate to this aspect. The seer god is the god which the seer communes with. This is why in the Voluspa and elsewhere, the vulva is presented as speaking with Odin. All the knowledge which they obtain, they get from him, represented in poetry as the god questioning them. Yet the god does not divine fate as much as he decrees it. Just as Odin controls the victory in battle, he likewise controls the general success of any endeavor. In the Voluspa, when Odin and his two brothers, to be understood as his triplified self, come across the first man and woman, it remarks that before Odin, Vili, and Ve imbue them with their gifts, they are without fate. The idea of the god of the seer being the god of success is also found in Celtic tradition. The Gaelic god Lugh, upon his arrival at Tower, is given the seat the Sui, a word meaning master or sage. He likewise wields a magic spear. The side who held it would gain victory in battle, and he is called variously Buadach, meaning victorious. But the root of this word actually means profitable. In one version of the Battle of Magturid, when the other gods leave him behind to fight the battle without him, he breaks from his chains, races to the front like a wild thunderstorm. But after chastising them, he performs the necessary actions which they had not taken. He performs the divination ritual required to obtain the signs for victory, and only then engages in the fight. A similar custom was strictly enforced among the Greeks, who never began a battle without receiving the proper omens. While the aspect of the seer is only one part of understanding Odin, it is closely connected to his more warlike function, not only through his command over the fate of battle, but due to the mania associated with the battle fury. During the migration period, under the influence of Celtic and Roman artistic style, images of Odin appear. They do not depict a god as a one-eyed sorcerer, but typically as a young beardless man, often riding a horse, and in the company of a raven or multiple ravens. He's frequently depicted as simply a floating head, which is similar to early Gaulish depictions of deities, such as found on the Gundestrup cauldron. For some time, there was resistance to interpreting this figure as Odin, but a recently discovered example proves beyond doubt, as it includes a runic inscription which reads Wodnas Weras, meaning Odin's man, identifying the wearer as a devotee of the god, and the depiction being the god himself. The construction is interestingly mirrored in Gaelic sources by the figure named Fer Loga, meaning Lugh's man, with Fer and Weras being direct cognates. The idea that Odin was a young man is found in Norse myth also. Snorri remarks in the Prose Edda. But now, to tell why he is held in such high respect, we must mention various causes that contributed to it. When sitting among his friends, his countenance was so beautiful and dignified that the spirits of all were exhilarated by it. But when he was at war, he appeared dreadful to his foes. This arose from his being able to change his skin and form in any way he liked. Another cause was that he conversed so cleverly and smoothly that all who heard him believed him. He spoke everything in rhyme, such as now composed, which we call skaldcraft. Much the same is said of Cuchulainn, beautiful and wise, unable to grow a beard, but who transforms into a monster when he enters his battle fury. When Lugh speaks in text, he most often speaks in poetic form. In the text of Cathmag Turid, this has led to a large section being left untranslated due to the difficulty of Lugh's dialogue. We can see from the artifacts that archaic Odin had a consistent iconographic representation. Even the same hairstyle can be seen on multiple depictions. One Roman-inspired plate features what is likely a pantheon of Germanic gods. Chief among them is a figure which we can identify as Odin, holding perhaps an instrument used in sacrifice or divination, with a corvid on his arm, and the same hairstyle as depicted on various pendants. Other examples show a figure with corvids possibly speaking into his ears. Now this iconography is identical to that of Celtic Mercury, which dates back to at least the 3rd century BC. Celtic-produced coins recovered in Romania feature a god riding a horse in the company of 1 or 2 ravens, sometimes holding a branch similar to that held by Odin on the plate. Later Gallo-Roman sources show Mercury in the company of corvids, or more generic birds. Under Roman influence, these birds become swapped for the cockerel. On the cup of Lugdunum, this Mercury is put in association with Cernunnos and depicts a scene that calls to mind the Welsh myth of Gwydion and Lle. Hardly visible in the images, but positioned beneath the seating place of Mercury, a youthful warrior holds a spear. The association with birds, especially corvids, is most likely connected to the god's power over divination. Likely for a similar reason, Apollo is linked to the bird in Greek myth. The raven is the most intelligent bird. They can be trained to speak, they can solve puzzles, and can make very interesting pets. Yet the primary reason they were connected to prophecy seems to be due to their connection with death. Corvids feast upon the flesh of the dead, and this is especially and traumatically witnessed by those who survey a battlefield the next morning and seek to retrieve the bodies of fallen comrades. In Fintan mac Bochra's dialogue with the bird of Achille, the bird remarks the following in connection with Lugh. After the time of the armed son of Ethna were many ravens and hooded crows. It was a portent of the chewing of bone, beside heroic-handed Lugh. And he adds later in the poem, in the reign of Lugh, warrior without defeat, I used to bring back to my bird's abode, without unclasping my claws, bodies of warriors or soldiers. The association with the bird is likewise the association of the god with those dead on the battlefield. However, the dead possess knowledge, and the bird who feasts on them may be seen as able to communicate that knowledge or act as a messenger. In Norse myth, Odin's ravens, thought and memory, fly out over the world each morning and report to the god everything they see. The spear is also an important part of the god's iconography. In rock art, Odin is featured with his spear while Thor has his hammer. Gaulish Mercury sometimes appears with spear in hand, and at some sites votive offerings of miniature spears were made to him. The Gaelic gods are also differentiated by their weapons. Lugh has the spear, Nuadu the sword, and the Dagda the club or staff. The spear is likewise the weapon of Roman Mars, who also has various aspects in common with Odin. One of the blessings of the Germanic tradition is the valuable pre-Christian tales preserved by Skalds. They give us a rather clearer window into Germanic paganism as compared to Celtic sources, which have largely fallen victim to the process of heavy euhemerization. Thus we have a rather coherent tale of the origin of the world, which we are unfortunately lacking in Gaelic texts. Ymir, the first giant, begets by himself the whole race of giants. He likewise fathers the mother of Odin, Besla, a name possibly referring to bark, an etymology reinforced by the name of her father, Bolthorn, evil thorn, identified in Thorstrapa as simply Thorn, a kenning for Ymir. It says, "The brave Thor did not need to be asked often by the vulture path to make the journey. They were eager to oppress Thorn's descendants." Ymir possesses a cow named Auðumbla, which produces rivers of milk upon which he feeds. However, the same cow licks from the salt rime, Buri, father of Bor, father of Odin. No tale is preserved about Odin's early days, other than that together with his two brothers Vili and Ve, he killed Ymir, his grandfather, and then the three fashioned the world from his body. The tale has similarities to some accounts of Lugh. Balor takes possession of a magical cow, who brings prosperity wherever she feeds, and whose milk can fill rivers. In order to free the cow from him, Cian, meaning Ancient One, must have a child with Balor's daughter, Ethna, who is also identified as having a true name of Feathe, meaning wood. His birth is concealed from Balor, who in some accounts discovers this and tries to have him killed, but he is hidden away until he matures. When he is grown, he returns to defeat Balor in battle, in which he threatens to bury them beneath a flood and drive them under the sea. When Balor falls, his eye burns a hole in the ground, which floods with water, and the giants are driven beneath the waves, bestowing upon them their name, Fomora, meaning those beneath the sea. Then he establishes the Binding of Ireland, which is the establishment of the cosmic order. The number of dead Fomorians in the battle is compared in the text to the grains of sand or the stars of heaven. However, the mythical similarities extend beyond this. Saxo Grammaticus tells the story of Odin being betrayed by his wife. She takes up another lover and destroys the statue of Odin, causing him to disappear for a long while. However, he returns later to reclaim his throne, causing the death of his traitorous wife and the usurper. This basic theme surrounds both Gaelic Lugh, who is betrayed by his wife with Kermith, which leads to his downfall, and Thay, who is betrayed by his wife, Blodeuwedd, killed by the spear of Gronu, but who later returns from the dead to get his revenge and obtain the throne of Gwynedd. We can speculate that in the original pagan story known to Saxo, Odin is murdered by a conspiracy involving his wife, and later journeys back from the dead and recaptures his throne, in much the same way as Thay. The dynamic is present in Gaelic sources, but more obscured due to euhemerization, replacing Lugh's return with the arrival of Ich and the Milesians, who overthrow Lugh's murderers. Odin is called the All-Father, and presented as the progenitor of the gods as well as men. He is the firstborn of the gods, and with the earth he has his eldest son, Thor. This seems at first glance to be the key distinction between the Celtic and Germanic gods, but on deeper inspection there may be a common thread. In Gaelic tradition, An Dagda is also known as Echith Ol Ather, horseman, great father, cognate with Odin's title. The Dagda seems to be primarily a fertility god linked to life, death, and the weather. His harp controls the seasons, and he is called in the texts themselves a god of the earth who controlled weather and crops. He is seen as a liar and trickster, and also a master of magic. He is sometimes presented as a peasant. In one account, he is named as a cook for the High King, and one of the great treasures he possesses is a great cauldron of unlimited food. Some of these qualities appear like Odin, while others appear closer to Thor. However, it was Lugh who is primarily considered the giant fighting champion, and the list of giants he felled is long indeed. He throws a burning weapon which is forged for him by the smith god, which defeats Balor, an element that seems very much akin to the thunder god. In this way, some elements of Thor and Odin are distributed differently between Lugh and the Dagda in Gaelic myth, with Lugh possessing the skills of Odin combined with the giant fighting prowess of Thor, very similar to Vedic Indra. However, many seem to have viewed Lugh as one of the primary ancestral figures also. His name appears frequently in royal lineages. Ith and Lugith mac Ith are considered the progenitors of many of the Gaels of Munster, and genealogies expose that these figures are simple euhemerizations of Lugh the god. Lugith mac Ith's daughter, Te, is explained as the origin of Temer, the site of the High Kings, and she was married to Erebon, whose son Irilfath was also called Nuada Argitlav, from whom all later significant kings would trace their lineage. Some genealogies even make Erebon a grandson of Lugh. Possibly the name Erebon comes from Eir, meaning noble, and Evon, meaning twin. His myth also suggests that he may have at one time been considered the firstborn of the gods. The Dagda, Ogma, Nuada, Dienkecht, Govnu, and the others are said to be the sons of Ethna. Yet the myth of Lugh requires that he was Ethna's firstborn son, who was a prophesied threat to his grandfather. In the Dinchenhas of Loch Dergderk, the following genealogy is laid out. Echith, son of opulent Luchta, Luchta, son of Lugar of the waters, son of bright Lugith Lavin, son of tall Anla, son of heroic Leo Lavad. The genealogy is replete with open and arcane references to Lugh. The name Luchta means cargo, which is reinforced by him being nicknamed opulent. This is identical in meaning to one of the names of Odin. He is the father of Echith, a king of Munster who many agree is a euhemerized version of the Dagda, also known as Echith. Thus Lugh appears as the father or grandfather of the Dagda. However, it is Echith who has one eye, again showing the interchangeability of these themes between the Dagda and Lugh. There may be similar elements in Norse myth, as Snorri Sturluson in his euhemerized account makes Thor an ancestor of Odin, then has Odin name his first son Thor. In the Yngling saga, Snorri Sturluson makes the following comments regarding the folk beliefs about Odin. Odin was a great and very far-traveled warrior who conquered many kingdoms, and so successful was he that in every battle the victory was on his side. It was the belief of his people that victory belonged to him in every battle. It was his custom that when he sent his men into battle or any expedition, that he first laid his hand upon their heads and then called down a blessing upon them. And then they believed that their undertaking would be successful. His people also were accustomed, whenever they fell into danger by land or sea, to call upon his name, and they thought that always they got comfort and aid by it, for where he was, they thought help was near. In contrast to the view of eminent Indo-European mythologist Georges Dumézil, who tried to create stark divisions between king, warrior, and priest, and placed Odin firmly within the priestly class, Odin was typically pictured as a warrior and a protector, and has many names related to this function. This is, after all, why he wields a spear, the most archaic and common weapon of the warrior. However, he was also connected to the arts. Snorri continues, "When Odin of Asaland came to the north, and the deer with him, they introduced and taught to others the arts which the people long afterwards have practiced. Odin was the cleverest of all, and from him all the others learned their arts and accomplishments, and he knew them first and knew many more than other people." This is almost exactly the description which Caesar bestows upon Celtic Mercury, and similar to Lugh's title Samildanach, equal with many arts. It signifies that Odin was the mythical founder not only of the world, but of human society, sometimes called the culture hero. Just as a myth tells of Odin acquiring the mead of poetry which he distributes to the gods and men he favors, he likewise brought all the arts. In Gaelic sources, we have hints that Lugh filled a similar position. We are told he created all the tribal assemblies, competitive ball games, horsemanship, horse combat, horse racing, fithel, which is a Gaelic version of chess, as well as cattle pens and fences. In several praise poems of medieval kings, Lugh is described as their teacher or fosterer, and sometimes the king is called Ildanach, or Lugh Reborn. The poem Gach Ein Mar a Agve, written in the 13th century, says of Lugh, "Magnus, as he was taught, who is the woad-painted foreigner of the taking of Ireland? He goes over every fortification. Lugh is he, and he is not alone. Lugh and Cún na Cerda. Every trick at his branching back. His name in every victory victorious. In every time that there is an assembly. Every victory out of the victories of the assembly he obtained, and he got none without seeking. A spear bends against a shield, a man of falga, a man of hunting, a man who oversees every wilderness, a man of battle and encounter, a white scowled crow on a slim brown horse, a man who has every learning, the teacher of Magnus, good over all his duty. He turned his back to every misfortune from Conn, though he stood together. He taught him misery. He shut him up in every place. He did not teach him from the day he was a babe, but from when he had an eye for traveling. He indeed taught his legs to go into battle with the youths, capturing the cattle of every province with blood on his shoes. He taught his white curved knees to take the gap against the foe, to bend them strongly at the edge in fierce fighting. He taught the teaching of injustice to his smooth, firm chest, to be in the meeting of the noble with long spears in the battles. He taught customs to his throat, manners fit for a warlord, with nothing around it but a torque until morning. He did not teach save in iron armor, or in a branching cotton jerkin. From the crook of each branching line, his helmet was beautifully slender. He taught the white hand of the warrior to lightly grasp the spear or the sword at the time of the thunder of the troops. He taught in the middle of night the fierce hound of abundant locks, lying in a mysterious oak wood, and lying only in his armor. It is evil to endure his learning, and that is the recompense of the good man. A greatly praised warrior, his end is not without grief. Comes the flood of his fruits to a man at the end. Not meager the marvelous fruits he has after his burial. From red cloth, from dun beasts, from the gold of the craftsmen in drinking horns, from meat, from ale, from rushes, from the lands under his plough, from the covering of cows, from fields of wine and long days. from clothing and horses and armor as spoils, weapons with gold and wealth, the sure possession of Magnus. Lugh is thus called the Samildanach, the master of the arts, primarily due to his role in instructing and raising the king or warrior, teaching the arts required of him. Like Odin, he also bestows abundance to the warrior in the afterlife. The similarities presented in the poem, and the fact that it is dedicated to a Norse Gaelic king, may even suggest Norse influence, but if so, it only furthers the point that Lugh was interpreted as Odin. In a poem dated to the 13th century, Lugh arrives at the doors of Tower. To gain entry, instead of declaring all the list of skills he possesses, he instead declares that his art is swimming over turbulent waters with a vat under his arm. The statement alerts the doorkeeper that he is the one who possesses all the arts. But why the doorkeeper should think this can only be understood in comparison to the tale of Odin and his meed of poetry. Lugh crosses over from the other world, the land beyond or beneath the waves, carrying the drink which imparts poetic inspiration and knowledge. Sometimes he is called Luglin, which could mean Lugh of the waters or bog, things he is frequently associated with, but could also mean of the ale. While Odin acquires knowledge from Mimir, Lugh obtains the arts and his invaluable possessions as a blood price from the three gods of art. His defeat of them shows his mastery of their powers. Both act as teachers of kings and heroic warriors. Among some of the names of Odin we find Tvegi, meaning the Twofold One, or the double. This may relate to some conceptions of Odin as a twin or double form. Roman historian Tacitus said that the Germanic peoples celebrated a god known as Tuisto as their ancestor, father of Manus, who was the first man who then fathered the founders of the various tribes. Most etymologists believe Tuisto means twice or double, related to the English word twist and twice. While some have tried to compare this figure to Ymir, it may in fact refer to a specific conception of Odin, who is in surviving mythology positioned as the father of men, and who likewise appears in genealogies of Anglo-Saxon kings as an ancestor of the twins Hengist and Horsa. In Welsh myth, Lle is born as a twin of Dylan, and elsewhere the twin sons of Aranrhod are called Gwaner and Gwenwynwyn, meaning warrior and sorcerer. A tale in France of Irish brother saints Luglé and Luglien, one of whom is a strong warrior and became king, the other a chief bishop of Ireland after having removed one of his eyes. Their servant Ercambode likewise becomes a saint connected to shoes and travel. Like Vidar, son of Odin, old worn-out shoes are dedicated to him. In a Roman recorded account of the founding of Lugdunum, two brothers, one seemingly a warrior, the other an expert in divining birds, established this city after seeing a flock of ravens there. In Gaelic traditions, Lugh likewise has a twin form, though less commonly mentioned, differentiated sometimes by one being named Lugh Skeegmaiga and the other Lugh Mac Ethna. In The Wooing of Ever, Cuchulainn explains that after the victory of the Battle of Mugturrid, that Lugh Mac Ethna was given the kingship feast by Lugh Skeegmaiga. In one account of the taking of Ireland, the son of Lugh, Avertach, is said to have had a child with Helen of Leda, whose brother is called Louis instead of Castor or Pollux, reinforcing the link between Lugh and a twin identity. Possibly, this is the reason why he is said to have two wives, and why the children of Turin complain that his boat is designed to carry only two people. Given this reoccurring twin dynamic, it's not implausible that he was sometimes interpreted as Castor and Pollux. Diodorus Siculus said, "The Celts who dwell along the ocean venerate the Dioscuri above any other gods, since they have a tradition handed down from ancient times that these gods appeared among them coming from the ocean. I have little doubt that this was a local interpretation of Lugh, who is imagined in Gaelic myth as riding across the ocean waves upon his horse, and who in death was said to have fallen beneath them, much as Dylan and Thay's resting place in Welsh myth is in the sea. Yet Odin is most famously thought of in a tripartite form. He has two brothers, Vili and Ve, which together form a triad whose names mean approximately inspiration, will, and holiness. He is also known as Thriði, the third, and is presented in this triple fashion by Snorri in the prose era under the names High, just as High, and Third. Together, they create the first man and woman. The Gaelic sources are more enigmatic. Some of the folktale accounts say that he was born as one of three, but his other brothers were drowned in the sea. There is likewise a figure named Lugi Feartri, meaning man of three. This is explained variously in euhemerized texts, but may refer to an original tripartism. Louis Riefenberg, a very famous legendary king and an ancestor to many royal lines, was the son of the three Finn Evne, the three bright twins. Louis was the son of all three of them, and had lines down his body, separating him into three divisions that corresponded to his three fathers. Lugh himself is a son of Cian, who likewise has two brothers, Cu, meaning hound, and Cechan, possibly meaning four-footed, or almost certainly a triplification. There is also a figure known as Louis mac Trí Con, son of the three hounds. Lugh thus appears to have been connected to the same triple concept, which can be seen in many examples in Gaul. Odin famously dwells in Valhalla, or Valhalla. It is shining and golden, shingled with shields, and has spear shafts for rafters. From here the armies of the dead will march out of its 540 doors during Ragnarok to fight alongside Odin. The golden tree, Glacier, stands outside its doors. When Lugh rides up to Con Céad Cathach and brings him to his otherworld abode, we are given the following description. They came to a beautiful plain with a kingly fortress, and a sacred golden tree at the doorway to a beautiful home with electrum pillars. Though we have no other surviving depictions of Lugh's abode, it seems beyond coincidence that both locations would have a golden tree at their doorway. Valhalla is where many of Odin's chosen dead go. He leads them in battle, and likely not only in the final battle, but as spirits through the air on windy nights, as folktales recall. In the fate of the children of Turin, Lugh asks his father and brothers to rouse the riders of the Sidhe for him, which he will lead in battle. When he arrives at Tewr for the first time, he is likewise at the head of a host during the night. The Slúig Shia, which Lugh leads, is a spirit army that travels through the winds. Like Odin, he does this on the back of a magical horse which can travel over land and sea. Tirchan, an early Gaelic Christian bishop living in the 600s AD, wrote some of the earliest preserved material about Ireland. He records an interaction that St. Patrick had with High King Loigara. The king refused to become a Christian, telling the saint that he would not give up the practices of his ancestors, one of which was to be buried along with his weapons in a particular spot, so that he would rise to fight his enemies again on the day of Erdaha. Erdaha seems to mean something like renewal, refreshing, and the belief seems to be similar to that of Norse Ragnarok. Loigara's name means calf herder or noble calf, and he named his son Louis, identifying him as a devotee of the god Lugh, signifying that the king's specific beliefs were likewise associated with a cult of the god. We have also seen in poetry that Lugh provides to the fallen kings and warriors great treasures in the afterlife, similar perhaps to the rewards given to the Einherjar of Odin. Odin is sometimes called Draugardrotin, Lord of the Undead, or Hlefreyr, Barrow Lord. Lugh is sometimes called Lugh Lecht, Lugh of the Graves. Now, greatly overlooked is the connection between Odin and commercial success. Just as he provides success on the battlefield, so too he provides success in any undertaking. He is called Audun, friend of wealth, Farmatir, god of cargo. The duplicating golden ring Draupnir is an expression of this quality of wealth associated with a god, and it would have been in part due to this that he was associated with Roman Mercury. Ahmed ibn Fadlan, the medieval Islamic traveler and scholar, recorded the behavior of the Norse traders of the Rus. As soon as their boats arrived at this port, each of them disembarks, taking with him bread and meat, onions, milk, and nabi, and he walks until he comes to a great wooden post stuck in the ground with a face like that of a man, and around it are little figures. Behind these images there are long wooden stakes driven into the ground. Each of them prostrates himself before the great idol, saying to it, "O my lord, I have come from a far country, and I have with me such and such number of young slave girls, and such a number of sable skins," and so on, until he has listed all the trade goods he has brought. Then he adds, "I have brought you this gift," and then he leaves what he has with him in front of the wooden post and says, "I would like you to do the favor of sending me a merchant who has a large quantity of dinars and dirhams, and who will buy everything that I want and not argue with me over my price." Then he departs. If he has any difficulty selling, and his stay becomes long drawn out, he returns with another present, a second, and even a third time. If he cannot get what he wants, he brings a present for each of the little idols, and asks him to intercede, saying, "These are the wives of our Lord and his daughters and sons." Thus he continues to make his request to each idol in turn, begging their intercession, and abasing himself before them. Sometimes the sale is easy, and after having sold his goods he says, "My lord has satisfied my needs, and it is fitting that I should reward him for it," and that he takes a certain number of sheep or cows and slaughters them, distributing parts of the meat as gifts, and carrying off the rest to set before the great idol and little figures that surround it. And then he hangs the heads of the sheep or cows on the wooden stakes which have been driven into the ground. When night falls, the dogs come and eat all this, and the man who has made the offering says, "My lord is pleased with me and has eaten the gift that I brought him." There can be little doubt that the god that they are appealing to here primarily was Odin, surrounded by all of his children. In Norse myth, it was said that Odin's wolves ate meat, but Odin lived upon wine alone. And this seems to preserve the same sort of custom, with the hounds or wolves consuming the sacrifice on behalf of the god. However, it also shows that Odin was directly called upon for success in trading, which the Norse were heavily involved in. However, his connection to merchants would also have involved their protection during their journeys, guarding their goods from theft. He seems to have been especially linked to ideas of property ownership, so that one early inscription asks Odin to own the dedicator, presumably to put himself under the protection of the god as his property. In Gaelic myth, Lugh is said to have possessed a crane bag, which held magical possessions. He was unable to refuse a request twice and is named the most generous lord of Ireland, even as he also tops the list of the most powerful warrior. He prevents the Fomorians from stealing the produce and the cattle. His mortal son Cuchulainn, also known as Cu na Céirde, Hound of the Craftsman, declares that he will be like a guard dog for the fields, for the cattle, the boundaries and all the possessions of the smith and all the community. In his declaration, he is embodying the aspect of his divine father. Yggdrasil, often thought to be a name of the great world tree, means horse. Drasil, of the terrible one, Ygg, a name used for Odin. This has been explained by some as a morbid poetic reference to being hung on the tree, sometimes jokingly called riding. It's thought this may refer to the event mentioned in Havamal. I ween that I hung on the windy tree, hung there for nights full 9. With the spear I was wounded, and offered I was to Odin, myself to myself. On the tree that none may ever know what root beneath it runs. This event can be compared to the Welsh myth of Say. Impaled by a spear, he flies in the form of an eagle to a great oak tree. Gwydion, for his part, came under the tree. He could see the sow was grazing on rotting flesh and maggots. He looked up to the top of the tree. When he looked up, he could see an eagle in the top of the tree. When the eagle shook himself, worms and rotting flesh fell from him, and those the sow was devouring. It occurred to him that the eagle was Say, and he sung an englyn. An oak grows between 2 pools, dark black branches, sky and glen. If I do not tell a lie, from the flowers of Say this has come. An oak grows upon a high plain, rain neither wets it nor drips upon it. 90 torments it has endured. In its top, Say, thou Guffus, grows an oak upon a steep, the sanctuary of a fair lord. Unless I speak falsely, Say will come down into my lap. The tree is a sanctuary of Say, but it also stands in a place beyond rain, suggesting the heavens or underworld. One alternative account of the myth recalls that Say, there called Hian, meaning sun, was found in the Milky Way, which is likewise called the fortress of Gwydion. Though it's too much to get into here, Gwydion and Say do appear to be 2 parts of the same god, and the doings and genealogy of Gwydion largely correspond to those of Lugh in Gaelic myth, while the story of Say, although corresponding to some aspects of Lugh, seems to more closely correspond to figures called Lugh's sons, such as Cuchulainn or Cnú Deriol, both of whom have a romance with a woman called Blachnat, which is partially cognate with Blodaiwith. Gwydion and Say are closely connected to trees. They are said to have caused the trees to move and fight as an army. Gwydion's name appears to mean of the trees, and a Roman period depiction of Mercury found in Britain shows the god emerging from the branches of a tree. Other depictions fuse iconography of Mercury and Bacchus, a god of vegetation. An inscription found in Gaul dedicated to Mercury Viducius, which seems to mean Mercury of the wood, is likely related to the name Gwydion. In Gaelic folklore, Lugh and Cian cause trees to flourish on the island of Balor, but after they leave, they all disappear. There are several dreams of kings recorded in which they dream about golden trees, and these are explained by Druids as symbolizing the king himself as the tree, and folk beliefs long persisting link the fate of various clans and families to particular sacred trees. Odin is likewise the son of Besla, whose etymology appears to refer to bark or bast, the inner bark of a tree. She is a daughter of evil Thorn, reinforcing the connection. Bolthorn can be directly compared to Welsh chief giant Ysbaddaden, whose name also means hawthorn. He is the father of Olwen, whom Culhwch must marry. Many recognize a parallel between the story of Ysbaddaden and the myth of Lugh and Balor. Many of the early tribes in Ireland are associated with trees. The Ugantacht tribe appears to mean people born of the yew. The Darina means those of the oak wood. The Uifidgenti means descendants of the wood-born. And all of these show strong ties to the cult of Lugh, and almost certainly saw him as their direct ancestor, and that it was he who was the Woodborn. In Welsh, he is linked to the oak, and in Gaelic myth, he is linked to both the oak and the yew. Now, of course, both Odin and Lugh are connected to the battle rage. Odin is the god of the berserker, a warrior who fights like a beast, knowing neither friend nor foe in his rage. And Lugh is the father of Cuchulainn, the Gaelic version of a berserker who goes into rages by having his charioteer insult him. Lugh himself is frequently called Lugh Lon, Furious Lugh, or Lon Biemnach, Furious Striker, and I will do a separate video specifically on this connection with the berserker. Odin travels in the company of two wolves who consume the meat which is dedicated to him. However, Odin is also killed by the wolf Fenrir, consumed by him in the final battle of Ragnarok. This marks him out as being the god of the wolf, and likely harkens to an earlier function as the god of the pastoralist, who both raided for cattle and protected the cattle, the main source of the society's wealth and sustenance. Lugh is accompanied by a single hound, named in some sources Valinish, which, perhaps not coincidentally, appears to refer to the island of Ireland. The hound was said to be a wolf by night and a sheep by day, to turn water into wine and to heal wounds. Louis MacCon and MacTricon suggests also a connection with being born of a wolf. When Lugh appears to Con Céad Cathach, he says he is a son of Cu, son of Tyrnmas, and Cu is given as the name of one of Cian's two brothers. However, Lugh is likewise associated with slaying hounds. Cuchulainn kills a hound and takes on the name of the hound. Significantly, however, is a mysterious figure known as Fer Loga, Man of Lugh. In the tale of MacDoho's Pig, there is a hound which everyone desires, which used to protect all the people of Leinster. Conchobar of Ulster and Ailill and Maeve of Connacht both want the hound, and all the top warriors gather at the hostel and end up coming to blows over boasting about who is the greater warrior. The hound is let loose in the midst of it all to see who it would favor. It favored Ulster and began attacking the men of Connacht. It defeated the whole group of warriors and then began attacking the chariot of Ailill. Yet the king's chariot was being driven by Fer Loga. He turned and struck the hound's head off with a single mighty blow, and it stuck to the chariot pole. He then drove madly across the country, and it fell off at a place called Achcín Chon in Vile, the ford of the head of the dog of the sacred tree. After defeating the hound that could root a whole host of men, he then leaps down from the chariot into the heather, hiding and waiting. Conchobar's chariot passes. He leaps up into the back of the chariot and puts his sword right to the neck of the Ulster king, forcing him to surrender. Conchobar offers him anything he wants, and what he wants is to be taken back to Ewin Macha and serenaded nightly by the women of Ulster, singing, Fer Loga is my darling. That this hound is connected to the name of a pre-Christian sacred site, which the ford of the head of the dog of the sacred tree must certainly be. It suggests that at one time the story may have been more than a comical episode, that a figure associated with Lugh would also be a chariot driver, has an unexpected Norse parallel, where Odin, under the name Brune, is likewise a charioteer for Harald. Though very much more can be said, the topic is far too complex to fully cover in a single presentation. I'm working on a book which will cover it in much more detail. But despite a number of differences and associations that became attached to different gods, there is abundant evidence that the core identity of Germanic god Odin, or Woden, and the Celtic god Lugus, or Lugh, come from the same source, and have preserved within their separate traditions nearly identical associations and features. Well, I hope you liked the video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and consider supporting the channel on Patreon, PayPal, YouTube, super stickers, or become a member of the channel. Your direct support really helps me to do long, in-depth videos like this, so it's much appreciated. Thank you all for watching, and as always, stand tall.